Welcome to the Science of Relevancy, show number 4. Today, we're going to talk about and introduce a concept that I've been watching and participating in over the last about 18 months, almost 24 months now, coming up here in November. This is your host, Rex Allen, coming to you live from the Science of Relevancy studios just outside of Boulder, Colorado, center of thought leadership, innovation, and granola. Anyway, today we're going to talk about what's going on in the personal transportation sector of the marketplace out there. This whole thing, personal transportation and the delivery services. And I'm going to throw this concept out here and talk about this to begin to see if this is an industry, and we're going to start a dialogue and hopefully get some good comments going. And this will be revisited many times. So this is a case study that I want to bring to the conversation to start watching. And it's really about can the taxi companies, which are there's still more than about 4 or 5 thousand of them worldwide, can they regain relevancy compared to the rideshare companies like Uber, Lyft, and many others? And so I want to talk about the concept here. I've been watching this very closely, and I want to get some ideas going. And we're actually going to bring in some guests to talk about this from some of the top analyst companies and analysts in the world that have been watching this sector of the marketplace. Back in 2008, Uber came along, and the Uber technologies, cab technologies at the time, and introduced an app to do ride sharing, which most people are familiar with these days. And then along came our good friends at Lyft, and there's many others around the world. So really disruptive technology because it took convenience to a new level of being able to catch a ride, and it started to make some changes. Well, it's been in the marketplace now here since that length of time. We're coming up on a decade here shortly, and let's see the impact that it's been having on the cab industry, and talk about that, and discuss can the cab companies regain relevancy. And being watching this and being involved in this quite a bit as somebody who's has some apps in this space and working closely in the Uber, Lyft, and taxi industry, I have some thoughts about this. And so I wanted to introduce this and start to talk about what's happening. Now, the rideshare business has been out there for quite some time. The two big 800-pound gorillas, obviously Uber, which is in about 730 markets, Lyft in about 300 markets worldwide, and then various other smaller ones throughout Asia, Australia, and Europe. Um, Now, the interesting thing about this, these are all been funded by venture capital. And just for an example's sake, Uber and Lyft have yet to make a profit. Both of them bleed money on a quarterly basis. Uber has actually raised more capital than any um, technology firm in the history of the world. So they raised over $19 billion, and they still lose about $4 to $5 billion a year. Those numbers are shrinking, but they've got some big problems. So the game's not over, in my opinion, after being really close to this, and I have some thoughts around that, and we'll discuss this a little bit. The cab industry's been around for about 100 years. There have been some issues, and we're seeing a repeat of some of these things that had happened to the cab industry 100 years ago. So 100 years ago, the concept of having a taxi out there, it exploded much like the rideshare business has done today over the last 8 to 10 years. Now, the issue, what happened and took place is that it was relatively a low entry level to get a cab on the street. So someone just had to buy a car and get them out there in this place. Now, what happened is that the competition grew, and there were a lot of competitors back then. So you look here in the Denver market, which we shadow. Yellow Cab has been here over 91 years in the Denver market. Well, what took place is there were lots of competitors there, and each of the competitors started to race to the bottom. So with their rates, and so what happened? It was a short time, great experience for the riders. But what started to happen is the drivers weren't making money, the cab companies weren't making money, and what was perceived as part of the transportation system at that time, the public utilities commissions in each of the states had to step in and actually regulate rates because nobody was making money. So if the drivers weren't making money and the cab companies weren't making money, the next thing was going to happen is you're going to lose this vital component of the transportation system out there. So the Public Utilities Commission stepped in and started regulating the rates. Now, as subsequently what happened, those rates came up to a point where drivers were able to make money, the cab companies were able to make money, and the industry stabilized. And for about 75, 80 years now, actually maybe even longer, the um, the industry's been stable because those were the technology choices, cars. Um, what you saw is some modifications in the dispatch systems that came along in the late 80s and early 90s, and those technologies evolved, especially as cellular technology came a little bit further along, and GPS, with the GPS satellites being launched, and the internet. Well, the cab companies, most of them are organizations that are very old in comparisons to the rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft. You have companies that are now in second or third generation companies that are run by mostly family, small business type companies. Now, there are a lot of great cab companies out there. In fact, the local operators here in Denver, I think the world of them, they do a great job. They do a great job in running a cab company. The challenge they have, and all of the industry, is that they're not really technology companies, and you can't fault them. It's not their fault. They didn't grow up on technology. They didn't look at technology first on how to make money. They continue to make money and do a good job. And then when the Uber and Lyft technologies came along, um, it wasn't that they were asleep, it's just they didn't know how to remain relevant through the apps and the marketing to keep their message fresh. And so now we have a situation where the rates are being unregulated on state by state, so the public utilities commissions are allowing rate adjustments to happen there. You have companies that are looking at the cab companies, and most of the industry is looking at, well, what technologies we deploy, but unfortunately, they really don't have the expertise to do that, as I've seen. And then the whole issue that's really the root cause of this industry is it's very fragmented. What I mean by that is you've got Uber, who has Uber and Uber Eats, who's in the personal ride transportation business and food delivery. Well, then you got competitors like DoorDash that are out there. And then you got people like Quicksilver who are national, and they do delivery of packages and those types of things. But the reality is the entire industry is plagued by the fact that the drivers are not making enough money. A typical Uber and Lyft driver income has come down dramatically. If you look across market statistics, everywhere from New York down to cities the size of Colorado Springs, that level, mid markets kind of like Denver, Detroit, Columbus, Indianapolis, places like that, the average Lyft and Uber driver is making between $15 and $18 an hour. So it's really not this panacea of money. And then almost 90% of their drivers drive part time. So they're just filling in. So it's not really an industry where people are making a livable wage. I mean, if you look at this, there are a lot of fast food restaurants and restaurants in general, retail, making the same kind of money. And so the only thing that's making this and keeping this disruptive right now is that Uber and Lyft and others in the rideshare industry are relying on what the taxi companies have done forever, is sort of this gig economy, this whole thing of I will provide my services as a driver, as an independent contractor. Well, none of them are making money. So if you look at Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Grubhub, and others, Nobody's making money yet. They're being run on venture capital, and there's lots of issues. So um, it's going to be an interesting race. I think there's a lot that can be done here. And the question is, will the cab companies hire the right type of talent, bring in the leadership that think like Amazon, that think like Uber, that think like Walmart? Are they going to be smart enough to, and then also have the resources to invest in a comprehensive transition to regain relevancy? In my opinion, most of those companies that are well run, that are still established and still profitable these days, are going to have to bring in outside experts from industries that probably from software and high tech who really understand how to transform the marketplace. They're going to need to invest in technologies, but it's more than the technology. They need to invest in the customer experience. They need to invest in marketing. And in fact, if I were a cab company or a taxi company today, I would put a new brand out. I would put an absolute new brand out that has nothing to do with the word cab or taxi in it, as those have sort of perceptions in the world today of old technology, kind of the greasy, grimy driver that doesn't speak English very well and is kind of the crazy, the stories based on the stereotypes have been out there. But I do think there is an opportunity for this industry to rebound because there's a lot of things that the taxi companies can do that Uber and Lyft just certainly can't do at this point in time. Um, Case in point, a couple of those are wheelchair and handy access type of fleets that Uber and Lyft just cannot staff. Um, Flat pricing, where there's consistency in pricing in the taxi companies, it's 24/7. So Uber and Lyft have yet to address that, and there are instances with their surge pricing models where when the amount of demand goes up, you can have something like there was recently here in Denver, where there were three concerts going on, that people took a Uber out to a concert, and the rate was $15. And then on the backside, when they came home, because all the concerts released at the same time, the same fare to go right back home was actually over $90. So there's a lot of issues at there. Now, I think I do see that there is opportunity to regain relevancy here because of all the extra services that the cab companies can do and their business to business a business that they have in place. So their relationships with hospitals and clinics and government entities and those types of things where it's important. But again, I'm going to make some forecasts here. I think this is an industry that is salvageable. I hope and pray that it does not end up like the Sears of the world and the Toys R Us, where the ownership in the uh, cab and taxi companies just refuse to reinvest. I think with some reinvestment there, they can actually even and match up with the Uber and rideshare, Lyft and rideshare type companies and the delivery companies. So another prediction I'm going to make here in this industry, and we're going to get an expert or two in to talk about this, is the fact that once these companies wake up and start to treat the driver like a true business partner and help them make money. So I think the industry needs to go something almost near like a franchise where it's driver centric, where a driver works a smaller area. They do all types of deliveries. So they run errands, they pick up riders, they deliver packages, they deliver food, you name it. So when the industry finally gets its head on straight, Uber and Lyft, I think there's going to be, and the taxi companies, the winner is going to come out with a company that becomes the sole concierge transportation type service provider that has subscription revenue for people to buy a subscription for loyalty programs, and a driver centric solution so the drivers can actually make a livable wage. One of the challenges of this entire gig economy, where people are providing 1099 services on demand, is the fact that people need to make a livable wage. There's not a whole lot of value in taking on a and becoming a driver for any one of these companies if you can't pay the bills. Right now, Uber and Lyft have over 90%. In fact, Uber is over 95% turnover after 3 months. And so it's a really interesting marketplace to see what happens. Now, DoorDash is big on the scene and they're throwing things out there, but they pay a whopping $1 for the delivery and then you get the tips. So they advertise $25 an hour, but I think that would be extremely hard to get. You also have Amazon in the game with their gig offerings on this gig economy offerings where they have Flex, Amazon Flex program where you can deliver packages. But I think the genius is going to come where somebody does it all and does it first in small markets and then moves up. So stay tuned to this case study and relevancy, and we're going to see what happens in this industry as the captains of the personal transportation delivery industry roll up their sleeves and see if they can regain relevance against the newcomers with the rideshare technologies and the small package and food delivery business. So until next time, again, we're going to really open up this one a lot. Stay tuned and stay relevant.